I wanted to start by saying thank you very much for being the first guest on Gene East's A-Grade podcast series. You were the first person that I reached out to, and I really appreciate you taking the time today. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, no problem. I'm looking forward to it as well.
It was interesting doing the preparation for this and thinking back to when we first started talking in 2019. And I was thinking back, and if I remember correctly, I think I cold called you, and you answered, right? And we kind of hit it off and have stayed in contact pretty much, with a fair degree of regularity since then. But I remember about 6 months later, after that first call, maybe sometime after that, you said to me, James, it was kind of lucky that I answered the phone, because I was in a position at that time to answer the phone, and I just did, and that's a message that I share to the team all the time, that you got to be in it to win it. You got to pick up the phone. You've got to be proactive in this game to get the results. So it's interesting to think about that moment. 6 years later, we're here. It's an interesting journey.
Yeah, it's funny. Early in my career, I had a screensaver that said you can always make one more phone call, and that one phone call, that one extra phone call, can make such a huge difference career-wise.
I couldn't agree with that more. Absolutely right. And the reason why I wanted to do this podcast series is because I listened to a ton of podcasts and I learned so much from them. And I wanted to have a podcast series speaking to leaders in our space, so that younger people or less experienced salespeople or equally sales leaders could listen to these conversations and take something from them. I think especially, for your most recent position at Actimize, I think that VP, SVP level is one of the most difficult in sales. And so it'd just be interesting to me, and I'm sure the listeners to hear about that and just the mindset and the career journey that you took to get there.
Sure. I'm happy to share that today.
Thinking about the start, I know that you didn't originally start in licensed SaaS, software sales. You originally started in fixed income sales with Smith Barney, which is now Morgan Stanley, I believe.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting start to your commercial life. I always fancy myself as a bit of a trader, Patrick, but unfortunately I didn't have the mental arithmetic to be able to do that type of a job. But you're obviously very successfully in that space for a long time. What was that like? Was it like Flash Boys? Was it like Michael Lewis books, or how was it?
Yeah, it was pretty exciting. I was really enamored with the markets and trading and Wall Street. I was a finance and an economy major, or economics major, back in university. So I'd always kind of had this view that I'd go to Wall Street and make my fortune. Getting on the sales trading desk was a real education. I mean, it's you're sitting in front of 6 or 7 screens. You've got two different phones that you're holding up, and you've got direct lines to different money managers around Boston and New York and wherever else. So it was very exciting. But what I learned early on there was that it's more about sales and relationships than trading and math and understanding the markets. Sure, you had to understand the markets, but you also had to be good at building relationships, and you had to be easy to do business with, and you had to be fun, because they had the same direct line to everybody on Wall Street. So if you were difficult, or you were boring, or you weren't providing value, then you weren't getting the business. So it really was a fast education on how to develop relationships and keep relationships.
Super interesting. I say to people, the classic line, they'll forget what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I think being memorable is certainly memorable for the right reasons. Is certainly a trait that or a skill set that I would recommend to young salespeople for sure. Yeah, that's super interesting. And so you had a long career, a successful career in fixed income sales in capital markets, but then in 2008 moved to Norcom, which later became Detica BAE. 2008 is an interesting time to move into licensed, software sales, given the financial crisis. So yeah, what was that like? What made you leave fixed income or capital market sales and go into licensed sales?
Yeah. It was an interesting time in the market. 2008, there was, some financial crises, but there was also a merger with Solomon Brothers at that time. And it was kind of the dot-com go-go era. So, a lot of my friends were going into sales roles at some of these, dot-com. Some of them survived, some of them didn't. And, I felt at the time I was, I'm kind of stuck on a trading desk and yeah, it's fun, but I'm talking to the same people every day. And it was, I decided I wanted to find an adjacent market that I could still use my knowledge of the markets and Wall Street and continue to sell. So before Norcom, I did a couple of adjacent startups around market data and some software and things like that. And I just, it's funny. I was good at kind of keeping relationships and providing value and servicing customers, but I didn't really have that prospecting side of the equation. So I learned pretty quickly in the market data business that prospecting is a real deal, and you've got to do it. And it's not always the most fun part of the job, but it builds. It's the foundation for your success.
Yeah, I think yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. Regular prospecting, being part of your day to day is just absolutely fundamental. And you said it just compounds. Over time it compounds. It can be frustrating, but certainly certainly pays the bills. Just on that, given what you said, an interesting time in the market and having to get up to speed really quickly, did you find that you had initial success quite quickly? And do you feel that if that did happen, that was essential? Like getting off to a good start, how important did you think, was that, in your journey?
Yeah, I think getting off to a good start and having kind of the right mentors was a huge part of my success. I mean, the people that I worked with on the trading desk, I learned so much from them around, how to build relationships, how to provide value, how to have both an internal and an external brand, which was something I had never even thought about. But you need the team internally to do just as much for you and support you just as much as you need the paying customer to support you. So it was that type of mentorship and that type of education and just learning how to do things the right way made such a difference as a start. I can't imagine kind of being handed a phone book and told to go out and slog and find my business. I think that would be, a tough way to start, and you'd have to really persevere to get there. You need that kind of helping hand to start your career. I feel. I mean, it was so important to me.
I strongly agree. I kind of worry about that, in the sense that when you look across the markets now, quota attainment, per rep is so low, and I think there's a number of factors affecting that. It's a turbulent space at the moment, but it does concern me about the expectations for salespeople joining the ranks and and what's actually possible in the first few years. And like you, I think joining a business where you can learn and earn is essential to set you on the right path. I couldn't agree with you more on that. In those early the license sales, you moved into into leadership, and then joined Actimize in 2013, I believe. How did you find that move into leadership? Was it something that you wanted? Were you looking for that, or was it as a natural consequence of being a top performing IC?
I think it wasn't something I was looking for. And actually, if I look back on kind of the earlier part of my career, I went from, being a sales leader back to being an individual contributor, back to being a sales leader. I think, but it just kind of naturally occurred. Sure, my success probably had something to do with it, but I'm also a pretty empathetic person. So if I see a teammate that I think could use some help, or a teammate that is having trouble prospecting or whatever, I may make some suggestions. Or I was very vocal in team meetings or trainings, just was always kind of visible and always kind of vocal. And I think just based on that and in my success and in my kind of my empathetic personality, I kind of rose to that level.
Yeah, I think empathy as a leader, we've all worked for leaders that, maybe don't have that as much as you'd like. And we know how that feels. But yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of it's a cliche to say that sometimes the best sales individual contributors don't make the best sales leaders. But, often is the case where, top performers, move into that role and flourish, and it's just, and they have the mindset of helping team members and, and wanting to see their teammates do well, as opposed to maybe more of a competitive mindset where, it's about being number one. So yeah, that's super interesting.
And I had some points in my career where I was a player coach, and that was probably one of the most challenging times in my career where, you feel like you're almost not good at two jobs instead of good at both jobs. And it's, so something's going to fall off the table. But, I kind of weathered that storm and realized that, maybe being a sales leader and helping with the bigger number and helping with the entire team was a better path for me at that point in my career.
That player coach role where you have a personal target and a team target as well is really, is conflicting for people. I don't think it necessarily produces the right behaviors and activities from the leader. And as you said a second ago, you can get caught between two stools doing those jobs. They are definitely, in my opinion, two jobs. But it's often the case for, to get into those leadership positions, you kind of got to go through that. As you said, you just got to, it's kind of the expectation that you'll, that you will do those types of positions.
Yeah, I think it's a combination, right? Like you've built this sales pipeline that can be 18, 24 months, right? And so from a personal point of view, you don't want to lose that deal. You don't want to lose the hard work you put in or see somebody else celebrating. And then, from a company perspective, you've got one of your top reps that has built this wonderful pipeline, and they happen to be one of your bigger closers. Like, you want to see that deal closed. So that's the challenge for both the organization and the individual, honestly.
Cool. Yeah. Thinking back to 2013 when you joined Actimize, how big was the business when you joined? Because obviously now it's number one, or certainly one of the leaders in the space, but in 2013, probably a different profile. What was it like at that time?
Yeah, it was smaller. It was more entrepreneurial. Nice out of Israel had just purchased Actimize. They were kind of leaving us alone, and it was it was the early days. It was fun because if there was a deal on the table, it was all hands on deck. Yeah, I can remember being in these war rooms and talking about strategy for different deals, and you'd have product managers and technology people and even C-level folks from Actimize in the room. And it really was, every dollar was important, and every decision about where the product was going was really important. And it was just it was exciting. It was we had some additional funding now, and we could hop on planes and go get in the room, and like it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of pressure to succeed, right? But it was a great time to be at Actimize.
I imagine over the 12 or so years that you were there, a fairly significant change in that, maybe, as the business grew and became more corporate and, became the entrenched vendor, I suppose. Like, how did you navigate that change? Did you feel it was organic? Like, did you have to think about how to be in that new environment, or did you kind of both grow as a business and individually together?
We kind of both grew as a business. It's like certain things would change, right? Like expense policies would change, or whatever it happened to be, and it felt like there'd be little changes every year, right? Like targets obviously always go up because it's sales, and commissions always go down because it's sales. But little changes like that, and little policies, and some of them were for the better, right? And some of them were, questionable from a sales team perspective, right? But it was par for the course. I always kind of equate it to, making like apple cider, right? The press, it gets tightened a little bit more every day, right? And a little bit more juice gets squeezed out of the apples. And that was kind of what NICE was doing to Actimize, slowly bringing us into the nice culture and, bringing us into kind of the world of adults, so to speak, from being a startup to a public company.
It's interesting your point you raised about, targets going up, commission coming down. 20 years I've been in sales, and sales recruitment. I think if there's one way to kind of frustrate a sales team is to, change their commission. I've been doing this for a while, as I mentioned, and I think I can count on one hand the amount of times where the commission has changed for the benefit of the individual, right? It's never that.
Yeah.
How did you find navigating, managing a team when the new targets came out annually and there was changes to commission? In that culture, was it almost expected? Did people understand that, or did you meet with stiff resistance at times? And how did you sort of, if so, how did you get around that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they're hard conversations, right? And I would say early on, some of the commission changes weren't that big a deal, right? But as we transitioned into, or as the industry transitions into cloud and more of an ACV model, I think the commission game and the sales game in general has changed so drastically from 5 or even 10 years ago. So it's tough to go from being a peer, right, being one of the sales guys in the trenches, to being a manager and then having to deliver some bad news about commission plans and things like that. What made it a little bit easier was the success we were having as a sales team, and some of the numbers that we were putting up. It only made sense that the targets would go up, and it only made sense that eventually they'd catch on to the cost of goods sold being pretty enormous. So when sales reps kind of took a real hard look at themselves and their business and what they were making compared to their peers in the industry, I think those conversations became a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think if there's one way to earning commission and doing big deals, certainly papers over most cracks. Nothing's ever perfect, but if you're able to go and do the business that you want to be doing and with everything that entails, that kind of solves most problems.
Yeah, when that cash register rings, it solves a lot of problems. That's for sure.
100%, 100%. Thinking about when you moved from being, one of the team into sales leadership, how did you have mentors, in that transition that helped you to do that? Or did you lean on your own experience of what you liked and didn't like when you were being managed by others? Or was it a mixture of both?
It was probably a mixture. I wouldn't say that I had some very strong leaders throughout my career, and leaders that I learned some really good things from, and leaders that I learned some things that I probably would never do myself, right? So you kind of take the good and the bad with all the leaders that you've worked with. And, so as I made that transition, I tried to take kind of the things that I thought were value add, and how I could, my whole approach to managing a team was to take the noise out of their day, right? I didn't want a lot of internal noise. I didn't want a lot of external noise. I wanted to make sure that they could do what they're best at doing, and that's making deals, right? So I would, I would take heat internally for, updates on Salesforce being incorrect or whatever it happened to be. I had my team's back because I just wanted them out there on the street pushing our products. And, yes, you had to have the hard conversations, and there were people like to be managed in different ways, so that was a little bit of a learning curve. But for the most part, I kind of took a hodgepodge of the good leaders I've had and how I felt about leaders, and tried to just clear the deck for the team so they could do their jobs.
Super interesting. I think there's a lot of similarities there between elite sales management and sports management, I suppose management of any type, but removing the internal barriers, as you said, removing the noise internally, just all of the stuff that's going to get in the way of them being with customers and progressing deals. I've been in situations myself where there's a lot of noise internally, a lot of politics, a lot of stuff going on, which just, it's, I always say there's so much competition outside of the four walls of the sales floor, there's no need to add to it internally. So Yeah, that's super interesting. And thinking about the specific sales, your background of selling to major banking and financial services customers, as we've mentioned on this podcast, there's so much change going on in the market right now. I think that there's never been a better time, in my opinion, to be in sales. But at the moment, there is a number of factors that are affecting people's ability to sell. If you look at, for example, buy versus build in the age of AI, what banks are doing to, internally, remedy AML and fin crime compliance problems. How did you go about selling to those major banks? Like, what was your strategy for really long sales cycles? Like, how did you approach it?
Yeah, it's funny. My approach was to always know more about my customer and kind of their strategy and, even their institutional attitude than anybody in my organization, right? So when I was covering, some large U.S. bank, right, I would read their quarterly reports, I would read their 10Ks, I would read, the letters to the shareholders, and I would meet with anybody that would meet with me at that particular bank because I wanted to understand from, the person that had their hands on the keyboard to the most senior executive, what their marching orders were, what was important to them. And what you find, especially in these big kind of enterprise sales, is that different factions within an organization that can have an influence on the decision and on the purchase have very different goals and very different targets in mind. So, you really had to kind of build this groundswell from the floor up to the C-suite to get some of these deals done. And the couple of things that I always try to walk in the door with is that I didn't want to spin. Like, I would always kind of tell it like it is, because I'm a firm believer that the truth is the easiest thing to remember, right? And nobody wants to be sold to, nobody wants to be spun. So I really kind of went in there with brutal honesty, right to the point where I would, if I felt that one of my solutions wasn't best for what they were looking to do, sure, I could try and jam it into the deal and make a little bit more on it. But I'm better off building credibility by saying, what, this isn't a fit for you. Use this, and this, go with a best of breed approach and, buy this from somebody else. And here's a couple of vendors that I think are probably pretty good. So, I may have been that rare salesperson that wanted to really understand the business problem, really understand the solution, and then find the right match, right? And that's, sometimes having the maturity to say, like, this isn't a great fit. And, sure, I could waste my effort trying to push this and get this deal done, but is it best for this person? Is it best for my company? And that's the type of maturity level that some reps need to find, because I think you can spin your wheels a lot in sales, chasing the white whale that may never land, right? And it's just understanding that mindset and knowing when you've done the right qualification, you've done the right differentiation from your competitors, and you can feel like the momentum of the deal, starting to build. That's when it gets exciting. That's when you've kind of got them on the hook, and now it's just it's all about execution.
So many things that you said there, Patrick. Super interesting. The point about people not wanting to be sold anything, people wanting to buy, and reps having the maturity and understanding that this is a long-term game. Advising customers honestly, being a trusted advisor, being an SME almost, and explaining to them that maybe the solution that you have isn't the best one for them is really, I think, what lays the foundation for long-term success in any market. That's super interesting. But something else as well that I wanted to touch on, you mentioned about meeting everyone and anyone that would take a meeting with you in these banks. And I think we often speak to reps at maybe mid-market level, and they want to transition into enterprise sales, into banks. And I think sometimes that point is misunderstood. Just the focus and intensity and the number of meetings and the scope across the business that's required to do these deals. Since COVID, since 2020, so many meetings have been via Teams, Zoom, whatever. And I think that there's just maybe a misunderstanding about the level required. Like, can you just go into that a little bit more? Like, talk about, you know, just that point, how many people you'd meet and the regularity. People would want to hear that.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, so there's so many different groups involved in these enterprise sales, right? So just just starting out with like a fraud team, right? You might go meet the head of fraud, and you'll find out a little bit about what's kind of top of mind for them, what's keeping them awake. But what you also realize in these meetings is that the value that you bring, it surprisingly, are the conversations that you're having at other banks, right? Because yeah, you can go in there with this mindset, oh my gosh, I got this great meeting with the head of fraud. They're the top of the market, like this is going to be great. But you're also a little intimidated because they're seeing fraud across a ton of transactions and this and that. But what you realize pretty quickly is what they're interested in is what's going on at the bank down the street. How are their peers doing? What are you hearing in the industry? And so you realize pretty quickly that you have a lot of value to share in these meetings. They don't always want to hear from the sales guy, right? But the walk from the elevator to the meeting room is one of the best places to find things out, right? The walk back to get a cup of coffee, whatever it happens to be. That's the so you'll meet with the head of fraud, and then you might go meet with some data people. Then you might go meet with the operations team, right? So because the executives might have this great idea on what they want to do, but the people that are in operations and dealing with the thousands of false positives or whatever may not think it's such a great idea. So you've got to kind of understand everybody's nuanced view of the situation and try and find the right fit. And it's I'm a firm, one of my early mentors always used to say, you can't shoot moose from the lodge, which meant you got to get out and you got to meet people. And if you're meeting somebody for an hour, that's an hour that they're not talking to your competitors. And, so I would never shy away from getting on an airplane, getting to a meeting, meeting people. It just was part of the experience and a big part of how I was successful at it.
Again, super interesting. And I tell you what as well, when I think about when I first started out in recruitment 20 years ago, working in London, living in London, working in London, you could call people and say, hey, do you want to go for a coffee?
Yeah.
And, there was an opportunity for that to happen. You walk down and buy them a coffee and shoot the breeze. You'd meet people and as you meet people face to face. There's much more of a connection. I think in COVID, we lost that. No one's in. There's, and if people are in the office, their diaries are normally packed out because, everyone else is in at the same time. But we're seeing the pendulum swing backward and people toward, more non-remote, on-premise work. So, in the office. So I think it'll be interesting to see if that unlocks maybe the ability to get in front of people more. Because as you said, it's just priceless, and it's the talk about work, but not about work. It's just, it's just that connection. Banks or decision makers are never going to tell you what, their secrets and the stuff that's going to give you the keys to the kingdom, right? You've got to meet them and, but they will after a time, they trust you. And so, yeah, it's super interesting. You mentioned there as well about different parts of the business and their priorities. Was there ever a specific part of the banks that you were selling to where it was particularly difficult, whether it be procurement or the CFO suite? CFO suite's always challenging, right? But was there ever a particular part of the business where it was always sticky?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the procurement techniques these days are a little bit, a little bit backhanded. I'd say that procurement has a job to do and a process to get through. So I mean, they were particularly difficult. I think the other area where you typically got a lot of feedback, and it was more of like an arms race, right? Where when you'd start talking about analytics and you'd have your data scientist and their data scientist, and everybody was trying to be the smartest cat in the room, and those conversations could be difficult. And then you get into arguments around technique and things like that. And it was always interesting. Like I never left a meeting where I didn't feel I learned something, whether it was something about a competitor or something about a fraud attack or just something about the business. That's why I loved kind of getting on the road. There was there's this idea that, oh, I'm in sales and I have to travel. I had always had this view of like, oh, I'm in sales and I get to travel and I get to go see people and I don't have to sit at a desk. And that attitude can make such a huge difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I feel, lucky to do this job, meeting people and, we're salespeople, right? We're supposed to want to do this and get out of it. I think, certainly in different generations, it's kind of changing a little bit, but I couldn't agree with you, more, with you more there. Interesting as well. You mentioned about like coming out of every meeting and learning something. So over the last 5-10 years, we have seen sales methodologies become more prominent to the point now where many customers would prefer to hire someone who is, say, MEDDIC trained in a different industry. So maybe if they were moving into financial crime, they might come from pharmaceutical sales. But if they have demonstrated, strong MEDDIC value-driven sales, they'll move them in. Like, how do you feel about that? I've always thought that being a specialist in the domain really, really helps. So being able to talk to financial crime and fraud professionals about, their markets in a language they understand. Like, have you seen that as well? Have you seen, different methodologies like MEDDIC become more prevalent? And how do you think that affects, the long-term success of, in specific markets?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of sales methodologies, right? There's MEDDIC, there's customer centric, there's SPIN. Honestly, from my perspective, it's a little bit of the art of the obvious, right? Like there's you want to do prospecting, you want to do differentiation, you want to do discovery, you want to understand your sphere of influence. They're most of them are pretty similar with different focuses on different areas of the sales cycle. And I think what works is when you find one of those methodologies that is best for your kind of sales culture, right? If you're a big, discovery sales culture, MEDDIC might be good for you. If you're more of a sphere of influence type or a SPIN type of culture, then, that might be better for you. I think, the truly good sales reps have probably been through multiple trainings, whether it's MEDDIC or SPIN or whatever it happens to be, and they'll take what they see as the valuable parts of each of those. For managing a team and managing a sales culture, having that everybody kind of dancing to the same song sheet makes a lot of sense. But it's the really truly valuable reps that can take that and make it their own and still kind of keep the institutional knowledge that they need to, but, add their own flavor to it. And so, yeah, I didn't get into sales to get into being a process-driven sales guy, right? I wanted to be creative and I wanted to be a deal maker and a rainmaker, but I do see the value in these methodologies for just kind of consistency of messaging and making sure that everybody's kind of doing the same thing. Now, where a lot of companies fall down on these is that they'll do the initial training at a sales kickoff or something like that, but then they never do the follow-on, right? Like the follow-on training or the deep dive on the, closing or whatever it happens to be. And I think that's where a lot of those methodologies are struggling in some of these firms.
I strongly agree with that. I think these methodologies, you said the training's rolled out, it's a 1 or 2 hour session and then it's kind of forgotten about. And maybe it goes back to the point we were talking about at the top of the podcast where, finding a leader where if you're entering the sales ranks where you're going to learn and earn and, and that kind of be bred into you, day to day, I think is really, really helpful. Thinking about something you said about getting into sales, not to learn process, that wasn't the reason. You wanted to be creative and work on big deals and, and be successful. From a mindset perspective, what do you think is the characteristics for you personally? Like, what was it about you and your mindset day to day that enabled you to get, to be successful over such a long period of time?
Yeah, so I'm intellectually, I'm curious. So I'm constantly reading and learning. And if I'm interested in something, I'm going to learn as much as I can about that. And, I became very enamored around the money laundering and fraud business. And just, I was amazed at how creative people can get at stealing and hiding money. And it's a pretty recession proof business, honestly. So, I'm one of those weird sales guys that needs to understand fully what I'm selling and the problem I'm solving. And, I don't have to get super technical, but I really want to know what I'm talking about. So I spent a lot of time kind of learning and having that curiosity kind of helped me, dig into the problem and understand business problems and understand what drove people. So that's a part of it. And then I'm also a very competitive person. I have this laid back style, but I love to win. It doesn't matter if I'm playing a game against my kids or I'm playing golf against my buddies. I have to win. So that's been a big part of my success. And I will outwork anybody to try and win a deal. It's just been a mindset of mine for forever. And right down to you can always make one more phone call. It's just I know I'm not going to lose a deal for not trying hard. That's how I've always looked at it.
Do you that's super interesting. Do you on the winning piece, do you have to win or you hate to lose? Which one makes you feel more? Like which one is it? Because I'll be honest, I hate losing. There is nothing worse in my life than losing. So it's interesting to know which drives people. Is it winning or is it not losing?
It's winning. I mean, if I go into something saying I hate to lose, then I'm going in with a negative attitude. But if I go in with expecting to win, then I go in with a positive. I will say this: my mindset is always an expectation to win. Like if I go, if you send me to some CRO job that I want to find, I expect them to make me an offer. They'd be lucky to have me, right? They'd be lucky to buy my solution, and that's my expectation of winning is always there. So I'm always a little bit surprised when I don't win. And not surprised, but just maybe put off by it, I guess I'd say.
I love that mindset. Interesting as well, you mentioned about curiosity. Curiosity is a fundamental feature, I think, of successful salespeople. On that point, do you think you can teach that to someone? Or do you think that is just in someone? Because I couldn't agree with you more, and I see it all the time. Curiosity just isn't there. Like you, like if I'm interested in something, I'm going to go head first into it and learn all about it. Like, do you think you can teach that, or can you learn it?
I don't know. I don't think you can teach a natural curiosity to somebody. I think you can learn a business. You could learn enough about money laundering and fraud to be knowledgeable in the room, right? But the true natural curiosity and wanting to fully understand and being kind of excited about the about the industry is different. Now, it doesn't mean it's right or wrong, right? There's many different sales styles, right? There's the kind of the hit it and quit it sales style where you do a deal and you never talk to them again. There's the relationship builder and enterprise sales, and there's no like right or wrong model. There people are doing deals that aren't curious at all, right? And just it's a job and they're going to make a dial and they're going to make some money. It's so I don't think it's something you can teach. It's just more of a mindset, but it doesn't mean it's a right mindset or a wrong mindset. It's my mindset and it's worked for me, and it might not work for you or for somebody else.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thinking back over your career, and thinking about the big wins, not going into details about the who's and the wheres, but like, what are some of the most proudest achievements that you've had in your license and software sales? Like, what are some of the things you look back on now with real pride?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say there's probably some firsts that I think I'm really proud of, like first fraud deal in the U.S. and first module sold, and first deal that was 8-figure versus 7-figure. Like things like that are awesome. And and then there's also kind of those competitive displacements where you've been told you've lost, right? And you do an end around, or you get like, you throw that Hail Mary pass, and all of a sudden the deal's back on the table. I love those because it's, you're kind of saving something from the fire, right? And like a phoenix, you're rising from the ashes. And those are just the most fun deals. I mean, they're not fun when they're happening, and they're not fun when you find out you're losing. But like when you turn a deal like that, that is one of the best feelings in sales. It really is.
Those deals, you're right. Absolutely, you're right. Those deals, I think when you look back, you remember the good times and like, the deal turning around. But then when you actually think about it, as you said a second ago, when you're not column A, when you're, maybe not the preferred vendor, it doesn't feel great. But to be able to resurrect it, to be able to be in a position to win the deal, you've got to keep going. You can't throw your choice out of the pram. You can't lose heart. You got to stay in the game, and you got to be at your level. You got to be professional, and you can't let the customer down by being anything other. So I think it's sometimes when you look back on those achievements, they're amazing, but then when you actually think about what went into getting to that point, even in the face of adversity where you maybe weren't, likely to win it, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. I mean, there are moments where it can be absolutely soul crushing, right? And listen, I mean, for all the deals that I'm happily talking about, taking the phoenix out of the ashes, there's plenty of those deals where I had this feeling that I was winning, right? And I got a little bit cocky about it. And I thought, I've got the best relationships, I've got the best solution, I've got the right price. There's no way they're not going to go. I mean, people like to tell you when you're winning, like, there's no way I'm going to lose this deal. And then sure enough, there was a little bit of an end around with a pretty large software company and a private jet. And next thing I knew, I was on the outside looking in, and that was a tough pill to swallow, because it was probably one of my strongest relationships in my sales career, and to have that hard conversation with somebody that I truly liked working with and respected, and that was tough. And I had to fly out there with some very senior executives and sit at the table and take my lumps. And it was it gave me pause, and it made me realize that maybe sometimes you can't be as cocky as you think you are. It's trust what they're telling you, but you have to verify, and you have to make sure that you've got all your T's crossed and I's dotted. And it's that classic Greek tragedy with hubris or whatever, right? Like that's it burnt me at a couple of points in my career. And looking back on it, I realized that I'll never let that happen again. I'm going to make sure that I'm verifying and understanding, and I have a big policy about no surprises, right? That's surprises are, there's not a lot of great surprises in life. I mean, the birth of your kid, and you find out if it's a boy or a girl. Those are awesome. But like when it comes to sales, there aren't a lot of great surprises, right? So, that's been a policy of mine, is no surprises, and verify what you can. And I think it's served me well throughout my career.
Only the paranoid survive, Patrick. And I think, I, like you, having been in pole position to win deals, and unfortunately, not turn out the way you wanted to. And in addition, if that's in some way, down to activities or behaviors in your control, it's those moments that I think, really can, as you said, make you take a moment, think about it, but say to yourself, like, that's never going to happen again. I'm never going to be in that position again. I'm going to do everything I can to be buttoned up and, box it off and do the job properly. But, I've been there. I understand. Thinking about where we're at right now, 2025, everything that's going on in the markets, especially in the financial services markets, you've got so many factors, forces that are affecting software sales, license sales, geopolitical events, new technologies, AI, stable coins, the list goes on. How do you feel about, like, what's the state of play in sales generally right now? Like, how are you feeling about it? Like, what's your take on it?
Yeah, honestly, I don't want to sound like an old timer, but I'm a little concerned about sales right now. And I'll tell you why. I think some of the new sales tools, some of the AI-based sales tools is kind of killing it's almost killing their own market, right? It's a, what Ouroboros, right? The snake that eats its own tail, right? If it's so easy to send emails and to spam people and robocallers and all of a sudden, the buyer behavior is going to change because they're getting spammed so brutally that they're going to go and do their own research and do their own decision making before they even talk to a sales rep, right? So I think, I don't know how you kind of rise above the noise in this market with the tools that are just peppering people with, what they consider insights, but maybe it's going full analog and dialing the phone and like building relationship, kind of going back to that bread and butter approach and walking the streets, so to speak. I feel bad for kind of new sellers coming up now because a lot of times they're remote, so they're not getting the mentorship, and they're not getting the the prairie dog where you can be on a call desk and you can pop up and hear how somebody else is pitching, or pop up and hear an idea, right? So they're not getting that mentorship, and then they're using these tools where they're not writing their own emails, they're not writing their own communications, they're not responding to their own RFPs, right? That's a huge part of how you learn to communicate and differentiate and discover and things like that. And if you're just using a tool to do that, then you're never really learning, and you're not adding any value. And I think that's the challenge for new sellers. Is some of these tools may be great, but I think to get above the noise of kind of where we are in this industry is really, really difficult for a new seller these days.
I have to agree. I think so many points there. I think if you will pick up the phone in this market now, I actually think it's kind of a superpower, to be able to get on the phone. I do think that does cut through the noise. There has been an explosion of sales and MarTech, sales tech, MarTech over the last 5 to 8 years, but there's not been an explosion in the number of decision makers. So you've got the same number of decision makers, but you've got 1,000x number of sales tools, and they're all accelerating the number of outreach that those buyers are receiving. So I couldn't agree with you more. I do really feel that going back to relationship-based selling, meeting people face to face is it's always been the fundamentals, but it's going to be even more important. But one of the points that you raised there is quite concerning, and that's just the day-to-day knowledge base that you build from responding to the RFPs, writing the emails, getting on the phone. Because whilst that might accelerate those tools can accelerate the outreach of the SDRs or the junior AEs, where's the next level of management coming through where, there's gaps there, it's not clear, if they don't have the fundamentals in place, who's going to step up into the leadership. So I agree with you. I think that is certainly a challenge right now. And it will be interesting. There's going to come a time where, the outreach that the sales and MarTech outreach that is heavily invested in is going to be redundant, right? So it would be interesting to to see how it plays out. And coming up to the final points of the podcast, and thinking maybe what we've been speaking about. If you were to advise someone, an experienced seller that wanted to get, coming through the ranks, that wanted to get into enterprise sales, Patrick, what would be the pointers? What would the advice that you would give those people?
First off, I'd say be a sponge. Listen. One of the one of the rubs on salespeople are they talk more than they listen, right? But if you can actually get yourself into an environment with some strong salespeople and just listen to how they do it, listen to how they navigate the highs and the lows, right? Listen to how they pitch, how they differentiate, how they go about discovery, how they build relationships. I think it's it's really important to kind of take what you learn from both good examples and bad examples and kind of make it your own. But yeah, first off, be a sponge. And then secondly, outwork everybody, make that extra dial, ask the questions in the training. Don't be, listen, I'm the guy in the back of the room, but I'm still going to raise my hand and ask a question, right? Ask questions, be curious, try to understand the problems that you're solving, try to understand what motivates your buyers. At the end of the day, sales is a pretty easy thing. It's if you do what you promise you're going to do, and you provide value to people, and you make people successful, you'll be successful at sales. They don't have to like you, but it's a lot easier if they do. Let me put it that way. So that would be my advice: listen, learn, and outwork.
Again, great advice there. On the first point, on the sponge, being a sponge and soaking it all up, and maybe another concern that I have is the working from home. In that when we first started in sales, like, you're on the sales floor, you're around top performers. If you want to get ahead, you are doing exactly what you just said there. You're looking at them, you're listening to them, and I think so much of that has been lost. Again, as I said, we're seeing the pendulum swing back now to less remote work and more, being in the office 3 to 4 days a week. And I really feel for the sales, for the younger salespeople that are entering the ranks. I think that is, super important to just to have that time with the top performers and being able to observe and build into, their behaviors into their day to day. That helped me massively. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And thinking about newcomers joining the sales ranks from a mindset perspective, was there any, did you have goals? Did you have things, like, were you always super motivated? Like, did you have goals? Is there any sort of direction that you would give outside of, the working hard and the points that we just said from a mindset perspective? Was there things that you said to yourself day to day to make sure that you were at it, on a regular basis?
Yeah, one of the things that I also learned pretty early on is that the seat you're sitting in is expensive. It's expensive to the company, right? They've put in a lot of investment to have a sales rep in this market. They put in the marketing effort. They've developed the product. So you're sitting in a very expensive seat. So you better earn your way and keep that seat. And that's always been kind of my mindset, is I want to make sure that, if somebody's going to take a gamble on me and my skills, that I'm going to pay them, back tenfold. And it's just it's what drives me. That, my competitive attitude on everything, and my curiosity. I mean, it's just kind of the combination of all of that has been what's driven me to success. I mean, if I was a teenager and you'd asked me, are you going to end up in enterprise software sales? I would have said, absolutely not. I'm going to do anything but sell. But just because they had such a bad reputation sometimes for sales reps. But it's been such a rewarding career, and I've met such great people, and have made more money than I will know what to do with, and it's been I highly recommend sales to anybody that's thinking about it. You just have to be able to weather the highs and the lows.
Couldn't agree more. And final question, just on that. You said it, sales is a roller coaster. When you've had a career as long as yours and, reached the levels that you have, it's up and downs from time to time. Like, what's the piece of advice you would give people in the game, the final piece of advice, just in terms of how to navigate that roller coaster, the ups and the downs?
Yeah. Compartmentalize. So, don't bring work home, right? Like, yeah, you've had a tough day, you've lost the deal, you've still got 3 kids at home that want to play, and you get out in the yard and kick the football around, or whatever it happens to be. So definitely compartmentalize. And then the second part is act like you've been there before. So when you win a big deal, have the same reaction that you have when you don't win a big deal. Just act like you've been there before. So the highs stay here, the lows stay here, and you just kind of calm sailing the whole way. Now, that doesn't mean you don't feel just absolutely torn up inside at times, because you do. It is a roller coaster, but you just have to kind of go in with that mindset that, you're going to win some deals, you're going to lose some deals, and at the end of the day, you're just going to try as hard as you can.
Great advice. And having 3 kids, Patrick, if there's one surefire way to Yeah, there's no danger of being able to kind of, you got to leave that stuff at the door. You know, you've got three kids, you're going to walk through the door, they're going to be jumping all over you. They don't care how you know, how difficult the day was, you lost the deal there.
Exactly.
You know, they're just glad to see you. So I think that really helps. Patrick, this has been absolutely fantastic. It's been an education from my side, and I wanted to say, after well over a decade of success, 12 years at Actimize, you left the business earlier this year and have set up your own consultancy. And I know that you're, you know, advising startups and more mature businesses on their sales and go-to-market strategy. Can you give us some just information about, you know, what you're doing now and you know,
Yeah.
and what you're available for?
Yeah, sure. So I started a company called High Battery Consulting, and I'm basically doing some go-to-market consulting, some sales consulting for, you know, folks in the financial crimes and compliance space. I'm also doing a little bit of work for some private equity shops. If they're looking at mergers and acquisitions, I can do some RFP work. So I'm, you know, I'm very knowledgeable in the market and, you know, from sales through, you know, operations. So I'm just helping where I can, and I'm really enjoying it. I've had some great conversations. I've had some great engagements, and you know, that people seem to be finding me. So far so good. I'll put it that way.
For sure. I mean, listen, I think, you know, if you're a startup or any business, or of course, you know, the investors, you know, being able to draw on your experience and leverage your knowledge base in this space must be, you know, worth its weight in gold. And so, yeah, it's great to see that, and, you know, wishing you every success with it. And just hugely appreciate your time. Today has been, as I said, an education. It's been great to catch up, and, you know, we'll speak again.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was fun, and best of luck with your podcast.